Our keynote speaker is Jake Pollack, and Jake is the program manager for the Sustainability Leadership Certificate. And so Jake will be presenting this morning. He's from University of Oregon. And I'm just going to read you some information about Jake. It's a pretty fascinating program, and then I'll pass it on to him. So Jake has worked in sustainability leadership settings internationally for the last 10 years in higher education, including 4 years in South Asia. He's mentored and trained students and professionals in aspects of sustainability ranging from cross-cultural communication to organizational transformation. His PhD research examined interdisciplinary and collaborative models of sustainability and a new triple bottom line of resilience, integrity, and commitment. Though his work in the field began in rural villages and grassroots centers of innovation, he's now interested in the scale of cities and cultivating a cross-sector platform for professionals who wish to accelerate and incubate projects that address our most significant sustainability challenges. He currently serves as the program manager and instructor in the Sustainability Leadership Certificate at the University of Oregon. Its mission is to provide practitioners with a theoretical foundation and practical tools for leading organizations, communities, and individuals to develop sustainable living and working environments. So a lot of that will sound familiar to a lot of our interests. Drawing on the unique academic resources at the University of Oregon, the program delivers educational programs in both person and online that bring together representatives from local, national, international communities, governments, businesses, nonprofit, and educational institutions. I thought that I had a lot to take on, so let's give Jake a big round of applause. And thank you all again for being here and partaking in this conversation. I'm excited to get to know you better over the next couple days. Thanks, Jake.
Want your water bottle?
Oh, yes.
Good morning, everyone. I know it's early, well, semi-early still. Thank you, Dr. Brain, for the introduction and the invitation to speak today. I feel a little bit like a city slicker here, coming from Portland, which is fine, and I realize that my program is slightly different than many of yours, but I do agree that we have similar goals, and I'm hoping that my presentation will give you some ideas or some potential directions to take your programs in the future. So thank you also to Utah State University Cooperative Extension and the rest of the Summit team for organizing this event and for the contributions your programs are making to further sustainability in practice. So let's see if I can, oh, there we are. So as Dr. Brain mentioned, my program is for professionals who are in the field currently. We offer a range of sustainability topics, everything from built environment to sustainability finance to food issues. As I walked around this morning, I saw a lot of projects that were really similar or kind of in with the same topic areas or same interests as some of our topic content as well. And so I wanted to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with other educators and people who are passionate about sustainability. And a story from the current Director of Academic Extension at University of Oregon, Sandra Gladney, will illustrate how far we've come in the last decade in terms of developing these kinds of programs. So when they were launching the program about 10 years ago, she attended a conference of the Association for Continuing Higher Education in a work group session and shared that she was working on a sustainability professional development program. Nobody knew what that meant, so they had zero advice about marketing, audience, and the like. Questions were all about, well, what is there to say besides recycle? Today we see a proliferation of sustainability programs at large research institutions, small colleges, and various academic departments and schools. Think green MBAs, law schools with specialization in environmental law, and so on. And while this growth in content and delivery is impressive, we are indeed in a time of assessment and a need to refocus and retool. Rather than getting too far into the gloom and doom of the ecological challenges we face, I'll let H.G. Wells sum it up. History is becoming more and more a race between education and catastrophe. Major disruptions in systems are becoming a new norm, whether it's the government shutdown of this week or the recent flooding in Colorado. And actually, I was just reading yesterday that the National Guard will continue to be paid for their efforts in Colorado, which is reassuring. So how do we, as educational institutions, respond adequately to help people respond to these challenges appropriately in their professional and personal lives? For our program, this is a guiding question, one that we use to define goals and objectives and to develop our criteria for assessment. This core question of coherence, or of helping people make meaning of these changes, points to a deeper level of systemic change. Although I will talk about content, audience, and many more functional aspects of our program, I'd like to keep at the front of our minds this morning the radical potential of sustainability to shape values and behaviors. Aldo Leopold writes of this deeper dimension and says, "Direct your energies to changing the values, aspirations, and beliefs of the private landowner." For me, this quote is a strong reminder to think broadly about sustainability and suggests ways we can design programs to both represent and cultivate these values and behaviors. This morning, I'll talk about our program as a case study of ways in which we can design programs to both deliver content as well as shift culture. So first, I'll speak a little bit about the history and development of our program and point out what I think are some of the highlights. Next, I'll talk about our current challenges and share some of the solutions and new directions we're considering. And in fact, when I looked at some of the materials, I saw sort of an open source approach where online materials are offered for free. I saw that there's online offerings in some of your programs, so I think that will be relevant for those programs in particular. And finally, I'll return to this question of coherence, or a deeper cultural transformation, and how programs can potentially model sustainability values. So there's only 10 slides, including this one. So I promise to finish on time, don't worry. Partly because I'm also interested in hearing questions and having dialogue, and I really appreciate that that's part of the format and woven into the conference. So this is our building. Well, what it looked like before the renovation. Doesn't look like that anymore. You'll see a picture of what it looks like after a few more slides. And part of the reason I share this is to just visually represent the evolution of our program and note the importance of the infrastructure or the context in which programs take place. So I'll start with the broadest frame, University of Oregon. Our campus in Eugene has a long history of being green before that was even a term or something that was hot for students to look in. The Architecture and Allied Arts program, which grants our credits, is a nationally recognized leader for sustainable design. And there are many other programs at U of O which have sustainability either in the title or the content, such as the Sustainable Cities Initiative, which is a year-long collaborative program between cities in Oregon and the university, where students in regular classes work on sustainability projects for that particular city. So they basically spend a year, and instead of these projects that they would do in all different, it's a interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary program. So, you know, maybe they're doing visual design, or they're doing something about urban wayfinding. And instead of those projects being something where at the end of the semester it's like, okay, I just finished my project, this was theoretical, they actually present to the town or to the city and say, this is a project that we think might work well, and then the city gives them feedback. And so the city is receiving this incredible amount of work, this real brain trust, and basically the students are getting real world experience. So when they go to write up their resume afterwards, they put their experience in the class as part of their work experience rather than their education. So that's one example of how sustainability is implemented or enacted through the University of Oregon. And the reason I mention these examples is to show that there's a strong institutional culture and support for sustainability, which is an important indicator, I think, as I mentioned, systemic change. So you could say, in many ways, it's an ideal environment for sustainability programs to begin with. So the building you're looking at is in Portland, and we're away from the main campus, about 2 hours actually. So this is a LEED Gold building. You can't tell by this picture, but you will. If you had a building tour, which we provide for many of our participants, you would understand that it's a true learning laboratory, or basically a case study in historic preservation. This was originally 4 separate buildings in the Old Town part of the city. And when we take a tour of the building and show people how the retrofit happened and explain kind of the development processes and the finance behind it, participants say that they can really feel kind of experientially and get kind of a, actually in the environment sense of what it is they're learning about instead of just theoretical concepts. So this points out the institutional and physical context of the program and how valuable it is in terms of what people are learning. This is what some refer to as the hidden curriculum, and I wanted to remind us that these are powerful aspects for learning and getting into the deeper dimensions of systemic change. I would say in some ways this is a great initial assessment tool for looking at programs in their context and seeing what kind of possibilities there are to further develop or to use the environment itself as a teaching tool. So now that you have some sense of the institutional and physical context of our program, I'd like to give you some numbers as well as some of the participant stories that will clarify their backgrounds and some of the reasons they come to our workshops. This is just a basic snapshot. The pie graph is a rough estimate of the different sectors we have represented in our programs. So while it shows where we are now, I would say that we've seen trends in the last 10 years that point to an interesting pattern. Early in our program, the content as well as attendees were primarily from the public sector, whether it was local or regional government. When the program shifted from Eugene to Portland, we noticed an increase in private sector participation, and this was also about the same time when corporate social responsibility was developing along with sustainability teams in major companies. So in the past few years, we've seen a plateau in the corporate sector and a renewed, and even a drop, as some are noting, and a renewed interest in cross-sector and social sector interests in sustainability. So some of the social innovation work at Stanford on collective impact and other work on what's being called the emerging fourth sector point to these blurred lines between these sectors. So some examples are social entrepreneurship models or ventures, benefit companies. There's a number, I think there's a dozen or maybe 15 states now that have B Corp legislation. Is anybody familiar with B Corporation status? So like Patagonia is one of the more notable or well-known benefit companies. So basically what it means is that the legal and financial structures, sort of the DNA of the organization, has the environment as a stakeholder in it. And so Patagonia, they recently announced that they're actually going to slow down production because they don't want to use as many resources. So built into the actual sort of operating principles and practices of the business is this focus on sustainability. So it's a different way of thinking about sustainability, and I put it up as a slice of the pie, which I think, and I'll talk about, is going to continue to grow as that type of legislation grows, as companies recognize the value in starting that way. So it's an important contribution, I would say, to our program right now, both in terms of content as well as participation. These new models also imply a new generation of sustainability-oriented professionals, those who consider sustainability to be the foundation or fabric of a venture rather than an afterthought or something that needs to be implemented as a separate initiative. So having a sustainability team, that may be something that goes by the wayside, although there still will need to be emphasis on it. If it becomes integrated into the systems, then it may not be as important as an initiative. So as programs, I would suggest we need to pay careful attention to this generation currently in school to better understand not just the innovation and fresh perspectives, but this deeper shift towards these values. A recent statistic I've heard on millennials is that 80% consider these values important in their career search. So a number of headhunters and the people who are doing hiring, the human resources are looking at this, especially in tech companies, and saying these are the kinds of values that we need to model as an organization to attract the best talent. So it's a shift in organizations. It implies a shift in organizations as well. Another way to think about this in terms of our programs is that there will be different waves of sustainability, where participants will arrive with different levels of familiarity with concepts and practices of sustainability. This implies the need not only for greater sophistication and program development, but also the need for keeping content fresh and current, which I'll talk more about in a moment as it relates to technology. So you see the numbers here to give just a basic sense of the range of participating organizations. These last few months we've had both online and in-person workshops with representatives from the sort of alphabet soup of federal agencies, so EPA, HUD, BLM, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, GSA, and others. We also have local government representatives, including city and county workers ranging from supply chain officers to water management specialists. From the private sector, we have large corporations such as Intel, Nike, and Whole Foods. And from the nonprofit world, large ones like Kaiser and Mercy Corps, and smaller ones like Oregon Folklife and Green Empowerment. And Green Empowerment is an international renewable energy NGO where they actually partner with communities in rural areas to develop renewable energy resources with them. So these numbers and organizations, or examples of organizations, tell us something about the demographics and audience. But next I want to share some of the representative stories that give a better sense of why people come to our workshops. So this is not Molly, Jackie, and Amanda, clearly. But I want to tell you Molly Chidsey's story first. She's currently the sustainability coordinator for Metro, which is the regional government in Portland, Oregon. In this capacity, she manages implementation of Metro's sustainability plan for internal operations, which include reducing waste, toxics, water use, and enhancing habitat for the theaters, parks, zoo, and solid waste stations in Metro's facility portfolio. Obviously quite a diverse range of sustainability programs. So Molly came to our program with a professional background in the field, but used the content in the certificate to prepare for a position with sustainability in the title. So it wasn't a terminal degree that she needed, it was to demonstrate basically this abiding interest and the institutional designation that she had new skill sets. So Molly has since been a strong alumni influence, and I want to mention this because it's been vital to our program's continued success with enrollment and with further resources and instructors. She herself has returned as an instructor and been on a few panels, bringing her expertise of applying the material in multiple sectors. Jackie Yerby from Cambia, which is a nonprofit healthcare organization better known as Blue Cross and Blue Shield, doesn't need the certificate as much as the specific tools. So the instrumental value is key for her. She has helped us to focus our content in the finance workshop by suggesting certain ways that she might be able to use the content to go, for example, to her CFO and make the business case. And she helps us understand what sort of language she needs or what ability she needs to be able to do that kind of communication effectively. She also continues to suggest local guest speakers who are leaders in their fields. So again, we have this strong alumni base who continues to support our program, and we try and cultivate that sense of reciprocity with them. Finally, Amanda Pease was a recently returned Peace Corps volunteer who we offered a partial scholarship to attend a workshop earlier this year on water sustainability. And I recently received an email from her about her new EPA role in the Superfund division, which is for cleaning out contaminated sites. She's working as a community involvement coordinator, which is basically a liaison between communities, often underserved communities, and the EPA, to make sure the community's values and concerns are taken into account, and that they understand what the EPA and contractors are doing or proposing to do. So we see these basic reasons for people coming into our program of career transition, these more functional aspects, well, they'll take maybe 1 or 2 workshops, and career preparation or career building from the start. And as I said, we really try and cultivate this program culture of reciprocity. We want our alums to come back and teach, to move from participant to presenter, and we do what we can to also assist them in their job search. So we try and facilitate networking sessions, to actually help them with sort of green job searches, bring in experts in that field. And so it's something that we feel committed to their success as well. So now we have some glimpse into kind of the who and why from the participant perspective. Let's shift to the content and look at some of the highlights there. Here's what our building currently looks like on one of the maybe 60 or so days in Portland that we have sun. There aren't very many, so. And the funny thing is, it seems like people always visit Portland when it is sunny. They just have like no idea what the rest of the year is like. So. But that's fine. We'll keep it a secret. So as I mentioned earlier, we're located in what's called Old Town. You can't really tell from this picture, but we are right on the Willamette River, and we are sort of straddling I would say, neighborhood that's being revitalized, and Chinatown. And so there's quite a broad mix of people and businesses in the area. One of the benefits of being in this area, and Portland in general, is that we're really close, or neighbors, with a number of agencies dedicated to sustainability in different aspects. So whether it's Oregon Environmental Council, Sarah Architects, a nationally recognized leader in green building and design, the Go Green Conference offices, or many other locally and nationally recognized leaders, we're in a city that is considered a leader or a hub for green activity. If you just watch Portlandia, you'll see how people will look at you when you go into a grocery store and don't bring your own bag. It's pretty funny. So this quote from Dan Vizzini, I actually ran into him as I was catching the train to the airport. He works, so I work in this building, the one on the right. He works in the one on the left. So as I said, it's 4 buildings put together, and we actually rent. We're the sort of main primary renter of the facility, but we also have other organizations, many of which are sustainability oriented as well. And Dan, his background is actually he was a pioneer in public-private partnership finance for green infrastructure. So finding ways that homeowners and people would actually invest in permanent green infrastructure that would help with rainwater catchment or other ways to kind of divert the water or more adequately deal with the amount of rain that we have in neighborhoods. And he describes this, our city of roses, as it's sometimes called, as this coral reef, in that there's so many different colorful and sometimes wacky instances of sustainability. There's this incredible diversity and richness that you also find in a coral reef. So, needless to say, this makes my job of finding instructors relatively easy. And one of the great joys of my work is to simply have coffee with many of these leaders to discuss topics that we collaboratively work to develop for the workshops. And then here I borrowed the elemental theme of the conference, which I think is a really powerful symbolic set, and also a great way to help us with coherence and sustainability. As I mentioned in the beginning, our program has so many different areas of sort of the workshops, and we have these sort of core themes and core competencies that we come back to, but it's difficult sometimes to give people a really strong sense of this is what sustainability means in 10 workshops in 65 hours, right? I mean, that's impossible in some ways. So I think the element's actually a really good organizing principle in a sense for giving people a sense of both the scope, but also very tangible ways of connecting to the content. So I just want to share a few examples of instructors and content. Kevin Halsey and I, he's the land use policy and planning instructor, and he'll probably also be an instructor in disaster preparation or resilience planning in this coming year. First time we sat down for coffee, I thought it'd be 30 minutes, 1 hour maximum. We sat down for 2 hours, and we're trying to figure out lunch plans by the end of it. And our discussion was really centered or started around land use policy and a project he worked on with the Bullitt Foundation Center. So the Bullitt Foundation Center building in Seattle is now considered to be the most sustainable office building in the world. Pretty high accolades. And what he was describing to me was the dashboard they had developed for the building, not simply like the kind of dashboard that you see on LEED buildings sometimes when you walk in that says, you're using this much energy today, and here's where the sun is, and here's how much the solar panels are generating. But the deeper dimensions of what ecosystem services is that building provided? What are the aspects of human health? What parts of culture or connection to the land are we destroying with that built environment, or potentially can reinstate or somehow cultivate? So another example is Seattle's sort of restrictive policy around composting toilets. They had to work to change policy in the city so that this building could actually be built and achieve sort of the levels and standards to which they hoped it would in terms of its performance and in terms of its sustainability. So this gives you some sense of how much we geek out about sustainability, but also it tells you or gives you a little snapshot of the level to which our instructors have experience, both technically and in terms of their work experience and theoretically. So one of Kevin's articles was recently published in the Routledge volume, Values in Sustainable Development, on ecosystem services and the limitations of that framework. But what he brought to the workshop was not only this kind of recent case study and something that was really relevant and timely, but these more practical tools for participants to walk away with, to understand the basics of ecosystem services, land use policy and planning, and then more deeply to understand how to develop metrics for evaluating built environment performance. So he pushed them beyond just kind of what you would typically get in the basic introduction to ecosystem services or land use planning, and asked them to creatively sort of work in small groups to come up with some of the metrics that might be appropriate in their organizations. So last week in our food footprint workshop, we hosted Eric Quemps of the Umatilla tribes to speak about native foods and ritual and the relationship to stewardship. And I looked at that poster presentation on the, what is it, One Sky? One Sky, yeah. One Earth? One Earth. Yep. So it looks like similar content, speaking again about that relationship to stewardship. So bring in the aspect of culture and people's relationship to land. Niati Desai, a colleague of mine from Oregon Health and Sciences University, spoke about her work with nutrition education for incarcerated women. Earlier this month, Anne Radel, who's currently part of the sustainable product team within Nike's Sustainable Business and Innovation Unit, that's a mouthful, taught the climate change workshop. Anne completed her MS with Nobel laureate and United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report author, Dr. Stephen Running. And I just share some of these highlights again to show the solid base of expertise, as well as the range and diversity of topics, and ways in which participants can connect to the material. So we want not only to have these high caliber instructors, but also pedagogy that really matches their learning aptitudes and work schedules, and which I'll speak about more in the next section with online workshops. So in sum, the last 10 years of our program has been built through quality instructors, a strong alumni network, and the program infrastructure, internally at U of O and externally in terms of our location in Portland, and more broadly in our bioregion and Oregon, Pacific Northwest, where a lot of those values are sort of baked into the culture, you could say. And we now see a broad range of participation from multiple sectors, as well as this gradual shift towards younger audience. And as I speak about technology, I'll talk about some of the other ways I think or other reasons we're beginning to see that. So now that you have some sense of the background of the program, I'd like to talk about some of the challenges we currently face. The first is relevant to higher education broadly, which is how we use or avoid technology effectively. The second is linked to the first in that technology can potentially serve as a vehicle for broader distribution of content. So this past year, we've been working to develop both the infrastructure as well as the program culture to adapt and respond to these issues. It's interesting that you started, Dr. Brain, with the mention of social media, or you mentioned it, and I came to find out yesterday, actually, that some of our registrations came through LinkedIn directly, some of our postings there. So it's good to know for us sort of the impact and the effectiveness of that. and to be able to track sort of how these outlets actually work and other content marketing campaigns that we've done throughout the year. That's one of, I think, the more challenging things, and maybe there's going to be more discussion about this, is how do you actually track the impact other than click-throughs or registrations that social media has, and how do you really value or evaluate what digital presence is worth and how much time and effort you have to put into it. And it's sort of this cumulative effort, and at the end of the day, it's hard to say, well, I just put in, $3,000 and we only made back 700, or those kinds of sort of cost-benefit analyses may not be as accurate in that circumstance. So just to clarify what I mean by chronological reach, I'm referring to asynchronous modes of instruction, so basically where a participant can access static content at his or her own pace. So yeah, that's a USB cord in case. So we used to have just a sustainability, it was like a little green, like a sprout coming up, and then we did that just to kind of like, let people know we're also going online, we have technology as well. So let me just define network learning. I think, we looked at it originally as a way to explain both in-person and online sort of modes of content delivery. And the basic definition is that it's a process of developing and maintaining connections with people and information, and communicating in such a way as to support one another's learning, so socially constructed knowledge. The central term in this definition is connections, and it takes a relational stance in which learning takes place both in relation to others and in relation to learning resources. So this is something that I think education in some ways theoretically is catching up to, the impact and importance of information, the way we access it, right? A lot of research has been done on online learning, but there's still quite a distance to go in understanding best practices. So again, we chose this term because we felt it described what already happens in professional development workshops. So, developing your network, exchanging business cards, getting a sense of what else is going on in the field, understanding, from the private sector what the public sector is doing, and potentially finding ways to collaborate and communicate about that. So with digital learning resources, we figure these different kinds of communication other than in person, such as email or web conference, were equally as valuable. So we had to find some way to kind of explain, this is what we're doing. And it's a challenge, I think, when people are used to being in person, to really take the time and explain, well, this is what you're going to do in person. Here's how it looks. And some of that challenge is related to demographics, but some of it is really just for people getting comfortable with learning in different ways, in different modes. The other challenge inherent, I think, in shifting the mode of interaction to a virtual space is how to preserve that sense of presence and connection. So the picture on the left was an interview we did with former mayor of Portland, Sam Adams, who's been a leader in sustainability for a number of years. The participants in the online workshop asked the questions, we recorded the video, and then they commented and discussed the answers in their blog, which you can see a screenshot of on the right. This is one example of ways that we've attempted to keep the learning dynamic. So we focus on making sure people stay connected during online workshops, often reaching out to them if they haven't posted, giving them a little nudge. Or in the case of the leadership workshop, we actually had them send assignments directly to a guest instructor, so that there was kind of this feedback loop where we had a sense that, yes, they're checking in, and although there's asynchronous content, we want to make sure that it's relevant to them, that they're kind of digesting it well and didn't have any burning questions. So this quicker response loop helps us build community and actually, quite honestly, gives a sense of social pressure to participate. There's something about online presence and the rate at which, 5 minutes? Oh, okay. I'm done.
Yeah, Q&A starts at 9:15, but you.
All right. I will speed it up. So this social pressure aspect, as I'm saying, is relevant partly because we want people to demonstrate their learning. So this idea of a portfolio model and diversifying that. We want people to be able to produce and show, either their employer or to have something as they go to look for work that demonstrates what they've learned and how they apply it. And similarly, for us, as I was saying about developing this online presence, we also want to show that we understand how to use technology effectively and have some 21st century skills, and that we can sort of effectively house or deliver these kinds of programs for them, and demonstrate what it means to use social media effectively to do this kind of education. I think most importantly is that we want them to have this basic threshold of technological literacy, and to show them how sustainability can be supported by technology. So it's not the be-all, end-all, but we want to just give them some sense of, either software or certain metrics or ways that you can measure sustainability and do sustainability with technology effectively. So this kind of brings us to the digital divide question, and that points out the unequal distribution of access to and skills for working online. We haven't resolved this challenge yet. I don't think we will. And as I mentioned before, we've seen our demographics shifting about 10 to 15 years younger. And most of our participants between 25 to 35 have taken an online class or prefer to complete half of their workshops online. And as I said, they expect a different level of presence from us on Facebook, Twitter, and our blog. And likewise, they're much more fluent and capable of creating a more digital portfolio. So a recent participant recorded her PowerPoint presentation for the climate change workshop and posted it on YouTube to share with other participants. So the cultural divide, some of you may be from places where you have a cowboy right next to the town sign, the county sign. It's something that we're seeing in the online workshops. So in a recent one, we had somebody actually from the military who's currently deployed in Afghanistan participating online. We had people from the Midwest and Southern US, and even someone who's originally from Puerto Rico. So what we notice here, in is kind of funny ways showing in the cartoon, is that we have these different shades of green. And as I said in the beginning, people are coming with the different definitions of sustainability. So the instructors have to balance between giving them this kind of baseline understanding of what sustainability means in that context, and then negotiating the different perspectives that these people have, and letting them also communicate their different values. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. So back to this challenge of coherence. I'll just say very briefly, these three that we've recognized in our program. So the first of these questions, I think, or sort of deeper dimensions of culture, is that of changing the way that we even define and talk about sustainability. So we're no longer in kind of this carrying capacity mode where we can sustain our lifestyles, but we've been in overshoot mode for a while now, as I'm sure everybody knows. And we're also living in a time of unprecedented unpredictability. So these more managerial approaches to sustainability are just no longer useful, and they can't predict what some of the risks or needs for mitigation and mediation will be in the coming decades. So we're shifting from sustainability to resilience, and we see a shift in the field in this direction. So recently, the Rockefeller Foundation launched the 100 Resilient Cities Project, which partly funds what they're calling a CRO, or Chief Resiliency Officer, for the cities who will win the competition. And this new position is a mixture of disaster response, smart growth, green infrastructure, and it's where we're also seeing, with resilience, a lot of government funding, as well as new partnerships between public and private. If you look at New York City's climate change planning report from a couple of weeks ago, you'll see this demonstrated. All right, thank you. So without further ado, let's shift to questions.